Well, I'm going to turn it over to two esteemed folks that I know very well. They know the political landscape, know what's going on in the political landscape, and all along those lines. So I'm going to turn it over to David Walker and Steve Rao, but I'm going to turn it over to Steve Rao since he'll be the one kind of leading this conversation and all along those lines. But when it comes to people in the political landscape, there are two folks that I have a great deal of respect for, that being our Morrisville City Council person, Steve Rao, as well as, of course, the esteemed Dave Walker, who has worked on a number of administrations, both Democrats and Republicans. So I'm going to back off and let them have the stage and have this fantastic discussion. And like I said, I know that it'll be a very rich discussion and all along those lines. So I'm going to just back off of this whole conversation and let them have the floor and all along those lines. So like I said, I'm going to add Steve back and all in that space, because I am one that believes that if you're not the expert in the space, let the experts have their conversation. So Steve, I'm turning.
Well, welcome everybody to American Politics. This is live from Wake Tech Community College in Raleigh, and I'm speaking at commencement at 6 o'clock. So this is going to be a 30-minute show, the last show with David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General for the United States of America under Bill Clinton, President Clinton, and Bush II. He also is the author of American in 2040, Are We Still a Superpower? And just is a great man. I'm out of my league here with him, but honored to be here with you today, David. Thanks for doing this last show of the year. And we're going to be back in the new year. So much to unpack. I didn't know where to get started. I didn't really prepare for today, but there's so much to talk about. Let's talk about, real briefly, what you're seeing now that Trump has won with these appointments. RFK, the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, then you've got Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Is this craziness, or is this something we should have expected?
Well, first, let's start with the results of the election.
Yeah.
Personally, I expected President Trump to win in the Electoral College. I did not expect him to win the popular vote, which is the first time in 20 years a Republican has won the popular vote. I didn't expect him to win all 7 swing states, although I did expect him to win a majority. So he won a very convincing victory. And we can try to analyze that as to why if you want, but I'll just leave it at that right now. Secondly, I did expect the Republicans to take the Senate, but by a narrow margin. Looks like they're going to take it by 53-47. And I thought that the House was a jump ball. Could have gone either way. Looks like the Republicans are going to maintain control, but very narrowly. But there's a big difference when your party controls the White House, the Senate, and the House. You have more of an opportunity to get things done. You have a better ability to impose party discipline than is the case when you have divided government. So we'll see what happens. With regard to the initial cabinet appointments and other appointments, Trump has moved out with unprecedented speed. He's made a number of different nominations. It's important to understand the difference between positions that he can appoint unilaterally without Senate confirmation, such as the chief of staff or the deputy chief of staff. They are not subject to Senate confirmation, so he can have whoever he wants immediately. And then positions that do require Senate confirmation. And all of the cabinet level positions require Senate confirmation, and there are many other positions beyond cabinet level that require Senate confirmation. Of the people that he's nominated so far, there are several that are controversial and are likely to have some opposition and may or may not get confirmed. Obviously, at the top of the list, I would say would be former Congressman Gaetz from Florida is extremely controversial with regard to his appointment to the Attorney General. I think at a minimum, he'll have tough hearings and he may or may not get confirmed. In addition to that, you've got Pete Hegseth, who is the nominee for Defense Secretary. Very honorable service, clearly understands the military, but doesn't have a lot of executive level experience for the department that's the largest in the federal government. So I expect he's going to get some pushback. We'll see what ends up happening. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at HHS, I expect he's going to get some pushback. And in addition to that, you've got the nominee for the Director of National Intelligence, DNI, Tulsi Gabbard. There's going to be some pushback on her. But I think a vast majority of his nominees will get confirmed. I don't expect that all of them will get confirmed, but only time will tell. And importantly, some of the most important nominees dealing with economics issues, like the Treasury Secretary, like the Director of OMB, and like the Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, have not been made yet. And I would respectfully suggest that while it's not a high-profile position, the Director of OMB is going to be incredibly important in this administration because it deals with the budget, it deals with government-wide management, it deals with regulation, and it will be the point and liaison between the president and any kind of commission that is created, such as the Department of Government Efficiency, which we can come back to, any fiscal commission or other type of thing that is organized. So they've got a very important agenda, and they've only got 4 years to try to get it done. So they're going to need to get a very fast start off with people who know how to get things done.
David, and real quickly, Senator Thune has said that they make it sound like he can do all of these appointments, but that's not true, right? He would require a Senate confirmation.
Well, that's right. Of course, Trump has asked for consideration to be able to make recess appointments, and that if he's stonewalled by the Senate, to try to be able to get the appointments for up to 2 years through a recess appointment. That's been used in the past, but it's typically not used for cabinet level appointments. And of course, the new Senate will be installed on January 3rd. And so the new Senate has the ability to expeditiously hold hearings on the most critical cabinet nominees. And the president doesn't get sworn in until January 20th. So they've got at least a couple of weeks if they could get some work done. And hopefully they will.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is quite amazing. I mean, towards the end of the show, I want to talk a little bit about how we've gotten to this point. I know that in the past you've been with no labels and the country's so divided, but I'm just going to give you my theory of why I think Harris lost, and then I want to see what you think about that. I think the first thing is the border was, I think, handled wrong by their campaign. I think if she had come out early and said that she had been against Biden, that she would have shut down the border earlier, that would have helped, because you got millions coming in that haven't been granted asylum, and I think you have to be given asylum. So that's point number one. I think point number two is lack of clear message on the economy. So I think so much of the campaign was, I'm a prosecutor, I've taken on the thugs, I'm going to take Donald Trump. It's an attack on democracy. But I think average Americans out there in these rural areas, even in my own North Carolina, they didn't buy it. And they were willing to forgive all of these terrible things this president did, or former president, hasn't been convicted yet because of that. And I think he became a victim. He became a victim of all these legal cases. Some of them weren't legitimate. Some of them were. And then the assassination on him. And then when you couple that just with the sense of the country, I think it just turned to be a nightmare for Harris. And I don't know if you have any ideas there of what I just said, but what do you think about that?
Well, I think several things. One, when Joe Biden was elected president, he said he was going to be a transitional president and a bridge to the future. And I think a vast majority of people interpreted that to mean he was going to be a one-term president and he was going to hand it off then to a younger generation after that. He obviously deteriorated while he was in office. That became very evident in the debate that took place in June with President Trump. My personal view is he should have kept his commitment and just served one term, that the Democrats should have had a competitive primary process. My personal opinion is if they had had that competitive primary process, that Vice President Harris would not have been the Democratic nominee, that there are a number of people in the Democratic Party that I think had a better chance at victory against Trump. But rightly or wrongly, the president stayed in until July. There wasn't time to do a competitive primary. The vice president was tapped because of the lack of time, also as a way to keep the money that had been raised up until that point in time. I agree with you that she missed the two top issues that people cared about. They cared about the economy and inflation. And while it's true the inflation rate has come down, overall inflation has gone up more than 20% during this administration, much higher in some categories, and people are feeling that pain. In addition, the border was not secure, and people didn't buy the fact that it was, and they were concerned about it. And those were the two top issues. Too much of her campaign was anti-Trump and pro-reproductive rights, and those were not messages that were going to carry a majority of the American people, and that's what we saw. So, as you said, I'm a founder, national co-founder of No Labels. We wanted to provide a viable third unity ticket option. That didn't happen. In the end, 70% of Americans wanted a viable third choice, and they didn't get one. But congratulations to President-elect Trump. He won a convincing victory. And now let's see where we go from here.
What is next for the Democrats as we unpack the strategy? I mean, I think only one. Okay, so silver lining in the clouds. If they go too far and they squander all their capital with, RFK, I don't think really he has the public health experience to lead the. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. It could backfire if they got back on message to win the midterms, to win back the House and Senate. But how do they hit the reset button now, the Democratic Party? Because what's happened, David, and for those listening, is Trump and the Republicans and the MAGA movement have now made the Republican Party the party of the working class. 47% of Hispanics turning out to Trump. 23% of black men turning out for Trump. Clinton, he was the party of the working class. It's the economy, stupid. I feel your pain. Well, now the Democrats aren't feeling the pain of working class Americans. So how do they get it back? I mean, who's out there in the Democratic Party? Is it Buttigieg? Is it Wes Moore from Maryland? Is it nobody? And that, J.D. Vance will be the presumptive nominee. And 2 years from now, he'll be starting to get around the country as the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party to be the heir apparent to Donald J. Trump.
Well, first, that's a lot of information. Let me give you a few thoughts on that. Number one, you have to focus on the issues of concern to the American people. And the issues of primary concern to the American people in this election were, in my opinion, the economy, including inflation, but not limited to inflation, border security and immigration, crime, international stability, and abortion. All right, those were the primary issues concerning the American people. Trump did a much better job than Harris on a majority of those issues. So you have to listen to the American people. Secondly, in general, I find that the people who make the best candidates for president are people who have significant executive level experience, because it is an executive position. It's not a legislative position. And that means governors. Or people that have relevant executive level experience from the private sector and hopefully some government experience. The Democrats have a number of very capable governors who, quite frankly, had they been nominated this time, might have had a chance on winning. But the Democrats didn't have a nomination process. They basically had an anointment process, which by definition is anti-democratic, but that's a different story. We'll see what happens in the midterms. The margins in the House are very, very close. But ultimately people make decisions based upon the issues that are most important to them and that have the most connection to their daily lives. The other thing is I think that the Harris campaign relied too much on celebrities. And most people don't relate to celebrities. They're not in the real world. They don't face the kind of challenges that a vast majority of Americans face on a day-to-day basis. And now we're finding out that a number of those celebrities were paid to appear and or to conduct interviews, which I think really is sad, if you will. So So you got to focus on what the voters are concerned about, and you need to understand that a vast majority of America is in what I call the sensible center, center right, center left. If you go too far left or too far right, you're going to lose the sensible center, and the sensible center determines who wins elections.
This is great, David. We got 9 minutes left, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the economy and then shift to foreign policy as we end out this show. And he and I are going to be coming back at least once a month, twice a quarter to do the show. And we're going to be bringing in a few guests. Let's talk about the economy. So Trump's talked about increasing tariffs, 20% on imported steel, 60% on imported goods of China, massive deportation, which is going to cost about $80 billion if he did do it. Are you concerned about these economic policies actually adding to the inflationary times that we're in? And you and I have talked about the national debt as well, which is at 34 trillion. So what do we need to do to get the economy back on track with lowering prices? Well,
one of the primary drivers of excess inflation was the fact that the government was out of control on spending, and the Federal Reserve kept interest rates too low, too long, and self-dealt in our own debt. The modern monetary theory was followed in 2021, 2022. That is a flawed and failed theory that needs to be cast in the dustbin of history. But we still have a long way to go because we're spending $2 trillion more than we're taking in every year. Our debt burdens are increasing rapidly, and now we're starting to have a problem with being able to sell our debt at reasonable interest rates. Interest is the second largest expense, and it's going to be the largest expense in the budget the next several years if we don't end up changing course. So we've got to recognize that reality and take steps to deal with it. And hopefully the new administration will. You've got this Department of Government Efficiency, which I think is more about the organization and operations of government. It's not actually a department. It's more of a commission or task force, which will have to be operationalized to make recommendations. But we'll have to see what's going to be done with regard to tax policy, spending policy, both with regard to mandatory and discretionary, because you can't really make great progress unless you deal with those issues.
Okay, I mean, that's a really, really great segue into it. So I think, it's going to keep monitoring the situation. In terms of,
by the way, real quick, we've got something in the chat where people are asking about deportation.
Yeah, please.
You have to set priorities. You're not going to deport 10 to 20 million people. That's not going to happen. But you have to set priorities, and the priorities can be as follows. People who are in prisons, people who have known criminal records, people who have already experienced their due process through the asylum process. There's 1.2 to 1.3 million people who have already been told that they're not eligible for asylum, and yet they're still in the country. So you have to set priorities on deportation. That will be done. And you have to secure the border. We need comprehensive immigration reform. And I think ultimately we'll get it, but we're not going to get it until you secure the border. That is prima facie job number one if you want comprehensive immigration reform.
The one question I forgot to ask before we get to foreign policy, and thank you for that, David. I mean, that's a good point, and hopefully they could do it the right way by getting legislation passed, addressing what are the things they can do for illegal and legal immigration, and the Dreamers and that kind of stuff, the DACA, is the social issues for the Democratic Party. So is it fair to say that gender and identity politics hasn't worked well for the Democrats? Looks like they're going to have to get back to talking about the economy and talking about these issues that are really resonating to these suburban and rural areas in America.
Yes, and I actually think those issues have hurt the Democrats.
They've hurt the Democrats. Yeah.
I think they've hurt the Democratic Party because I think a vast majority of people are not aligned with what the Democratic Party is pushing in that regard, including the example of transgender men playing in women's sports. I think a vast majority of Americans do not agree with that as a matter of fundamental fairness. Now, that's very different from discrimination. People ought to be able to do what they want to do as long as they're adults. But you also have to consider the concept of fairness as well. And I think the vast majority of Americans understand the difference. Non-discrimination, pro-fairness.
Right, absolutely. Final few questions here, and then we're gonna wrap it up for the year. We had to shorten the show, but I want to thank David Walker for being with us on this last show of the year. We might come back in the new year or later in December. Foreign policy. Obviously, it looks like Ukraine's going to be in a tougher situation with Trump being back in there, his relationship with Putin, the war in Israel. Where does this thing play out? Do you think Americans feel safer with Trump back in the White House, which he's been saying that he could end the war in Ukraine in a day, that Israel, they're saying nicer things about him than they were saying about Biden. Obviously, I think their stance on Israel wasn't as strong as some of those Israeli PAC. I noticed it myself in Washington last week. I had a meeting with the president of the American Jewish Council, and I sensed in the air a real anti-Harris sentiment and really gratitude that Trump was back in the White House. But where do we stand now on the future of our U.S. foreign policy?
Well, let's start first with Ukraine. The United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia signed an agreement in 1994 in Budapest, Hungary, guaranteeing the sovereignty of Ukraine against foreign aggression if they gave up all their nuclear weapons. They did that. The problem is it wasn't a treaty, and therefore it wasn't binding on the United States. It wasn't ratified by the United States Congress. What happened? In 2014, the Russians took Crimea. We did nothing. Secondly, Russia invaded Ukraine about 2.5 years ago, and we're now trying to help support them. But you can't deter aggression after the fact. You have to deter aggression in advance. The fact is, whether you like Trump or not, Putin and Iran were not on the move when he was president of the United States. And one of the reasons they weren't on the move is because they didn't know what he would do if he did get on the move. He's more unpredictable. Secondly, Trump clamped down on Iran from an economic standpoint, and Iran didn't have the resources to be able to fund all these third-party terrorist organizations, if you will. So I think you'll see a significant difference in posture between the current administration and Trump. Whether he can solve it in a day, I would debate. And part of the issue, you have to say, well, what's the end game in Ukraine? My personal view is Putin can't afford to lose, and it's hard to see how Ukraine can win if they're wanting to try to recapture every bit of land that's been given up, including Crimea. And so the question is, how do you define success, and how do we get to success sooner rather than later on terms that are acceptable to the two key parties, which are Ukraine and Russia? We also have to keep an eye on China, because China can be emboldened by recent actions and with regard to their ambitions concerning the reunification of Taiwan. And that's a whole nother story that we could dedicate a whole show on, I think.
We started a little bit late, so we're going to go for 6 more minutes. Let's spend the last part talking about how did America get here? You worked for 2 presidents. The country, we had differences of opinion, but relatively united. A respect when, I was running the other day listening to Jimmy Carter's victory speech where he thanked the President Gerald Ford for being a great candidate. When he lost, he said he was very honest and upset that he was crushed in a landslide, but he congratulated President Reagan. And even President George H.W. Bush wrote a letter to President Clinton when he was in the White House. I read a copy of that letter. There was a sense of presidents doing good for all the people, that the country would unite behind the commander-in-chief. How did we get to such a divisive nature in our country? How do we get the country going back together, or is it just too late? And is this the politics of the new century?
Well, I think that both political parties have been taken over by the wingnuts, the far right and the far left. And as I'll come back to where I started, a vast majority of America is in the sensible center. They're center right, center left. Most people are on the right with regard to economic and fiscal policies, and in the middle or somewhat left on social policies. That's the majority of America. But when you look at the leaders in the 2 major parties, disproportionately, they're to the right of that or to the left of that. It's also one of the reasons why the party registration has gone down. Both major parties are losing registrants. They both have about 25% of registered voters. About 51% of registered voters are now unaffiliated, like myself. We're the ones that decide who wins. We're the swing vote. We're the ones who decide who wins. I think the other thing is that the parties have gotten to the point where you're either with us or you're against us. We don't have enough choice. We don't have enough competition. We need fiscal reforms. We need immigration reforms. We need healthcare reforms. We need a number of other reforms, education reforms. But we need political reforms, because now we have a republic that's not representative of or responsive to the general public. We need redistricting reform. We need integrated open primaries. We need campaign finance reform. We need term limits. We need a number of things, some of which can be done by the states, some of which can be done by the parties, some of which will require constitutional amendments like campaign finance reform. So we need to take a number of steps to create a more representative republic, that focuses not just on today, but on how do we create a better tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think, David, someone asked a question. Just to add to what you said, I think, first of all, gerrymandering is a big issue. The politicians should decide who votes for them. It shouldn't be the people should decide who they vote for, not the politicians. So we have gerrymandered districts, which is awful. And I think finance. I mean, the fact of the matter is, someone asked the question, can we have a viable third party? Yeah, but the bottom line is you're selling out to the lobbyists, the big time money. Corporations can give unlimited money. PACs can give unlimited money. And so you're already buying out a little airtime. And then you got the technology and the social media where people are just saying whatever they want with basically no accountability by these companies that offer these platforms. So when you add it all together, it's just created more division. And I think finance and campaign reform, term limits, these kinds of things could change the equation. But the reality is, we have a two-party system today, and hopefully, maybe it's at a breaking point, and people will just come back and eventually say, forget it. I'm going to run as a third party. Maybe it's in the states, maybe it's in Congress, and then maybe it's in the local offices. But anyway, that's my take.
Yeah, let me mention one other thing. We've had a couple of people ask about the BRICS, which is, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, etc. The BRICS are aligning against U.S. and Western interests from an economic and other perspectives. I think we need to take the BRICS much more seriously than we have. They now have expanded their membership where their GDP exceeds that of the G20. They're talking about creating an alternative reserve currency that's backed 40% by gold and 60% by a basket of other currencies. We need to take this much more seriously. And we also need to put our finances in order, because we're not exempt from the laws of prudent finance. If you can't put your finances in order, your economic security, your diplomatic influence, your military capabilities, and your domestic tranquility will suffer over time.
Well, folks,
hey, David, I know y'all are wrapping up and everything. I'm here to turn it over to you. Wrap up, Steve, but you'll be glad to know that last weekend, not this past weekend, but last weekend, Reverend Barber was speaking here at the Hayti, where I'm located at on this day and everything. And he actually said that he is an independent, and there were a number of people that are on the liberal or the left or progressive side that were actively wanting that a third party. So there may be some push for a third party, not just from the right or the middle, but also from the left as well, because I think he even said that this may surprise you, but I am not a political operative in the sense of being a Democrat. I actually vote independent, and he gave some examples of times that he had supported Republican legislation, even here in North Carolina. So it does look like this push toward a third party may be gaining momentum. So I just wanted to share that with you because it surprised me, and I meant to tell you that last week when you were doing your economic show. But it does look like this push is coming from both sides to make a viable third party.
Well,
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We will be back. One thing I ask is send us your ideas or emails. You can just send me an email at sr@steverao.com. You can shoot to the Pod TV network and David Walker as well for ideas. If you want to be a guest, if you want to have a civil respectful conversation on how we have a candid, honest discussion of American politics and how we can have an honest and candid discussion of the issues of our time and how we make America a powerful superpower again. David, thank you for being with me. I'm on my way to Nairobi, Africa next week. I'll be back in the middle of the month, and hopefully things won't change too much before I'm gone. But in the world of politics, 2 weeks is an eternity. So, but thank you, and I do hope we can see you in North Carolina sometime as well.
Take care, Steve. Safe travel.
Happy holidays, everyone.
All
American
right.
politics.
Bye-bye.
So much.